Thank you so much for being here in the room and online as well. We have a few people who joined online for this event, Rooting for Healthy Soils in Europe. My name is Caroline. I work at the European Environmental Bureau, which is a network of about 180 environmental citizens organizations. This event has been co-organized by Pan-Europe and the EEB in the framework of the Solo project, on which you will hear a bit more later on. This event is recorded, just so that you're aware. And regarding the program, I will quickly share with you what we're going to look at in the next 2 hours. So first, we will start off with an introductory statement by Martin Dermine, who is Executive Director of Pan-Europe. He will be followed by Christine de Samfelare, also from Pan-Europe, who will give some insights on the Solo project. As a first speaker, we will then have MEP Manuela Ripa from the Greens, who will give some insight on this, who will make a statement, on the soil monitoring law in the European Parliament. She's going to be followed by Vera Silva from Wageningen University, who will talk about pesticides in European soils. Then we have Tuur Vandeweyer, who is farmer advisor and chair of the association AgroSymbio, who will talk about soil health as a foundation of agriculture. This will be followed by a panel discussion who will bring together all the mentioned speakers and also Sébastien Mouret from EurEau. So after very quick closing remarks, we will then have the opportunity for some informal exchanges with some light refreshments. So I will give the floor to Martin Dermine. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Caroline. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today in person or online. This event, the aim of this event is to gather a wide variety of stakeholders to rooting for healthy soils in Europe. There are many reasons to find common grounds on the need to restore and protect soils. For a long time, soils have been seen as dead substrate, but more and more research has been uncovering its immense life and complexity. Soil is the skin of the earth. Soil is considered to be the most biodiverse habitat, hosting more than half the biodiversity on Earth. The majority of fungi, plants, and half of bacteria are found in soils. Much of the above biodiversity also has a strong relationship with soil, like, for instance, wild bees. More than 70% of wild bees nest in soils. While the importance of larger soil organisms such as earthworms has already been known for a long time, over the last decade, there is an incredible increase in knowledge in the importance of soil microbiota. Fungi, bacteria, and plants form complex systems that interact jointly that led to the creation of the concept of holobionts. Organisms around the root zone of the plant act like little external guts for the plants, making nutrients available, facilitating their uptake, protecting them against pathogens, or also helping them in case of drought. In other words, healthy soils are indispensable to the production of healthy food and healthy crops. The richness of soil life is to be protected not only for the sake of biodiversity itself, but also for the numerous ecosystem services it provides to our society. For instance, nutrient cycling, carbon storage, water buffering, and water filtration. Healthy soils are the foundation for healthy systems that lead to soil fertility and food production. They are an essential ally in mitigating and adapting to climate change. Unfortunately, man-made soil pollution leads to soil life degradation. Heavy metals present in fertilizers or pesticides form an important source of diffuse soil pollution, which has been largely proven to disrupt soil ecosystems. On the positive sides, many farmers across Europe have shown us that restorative practices allow to increase again biodiversity in soils and soil resistance to drought or climate change. Indeed, the aspect of functional biodiversity helps us to better understand the importance of us as human to help soils regenerate and become resilient again. Up to 70% of European soils have been estimated to be in bad condition due to human activities. This requires urgent action to restore soils for current and future generations. For all citizens, and certainly for farmers and their successors who depend on soils. The past years have been characterized by an overall severe attack on essential files of the Green Deal. An example of a backtrack from EU institutions is the example of the recent proposal from the Commission to severely weaken or delete the majority of good agricultural and environmental conditions that are a prerequisite to benefit from the Common Agricultural Policy funds. Deleting these requirements go against all scientific advice and expert assessment in light of the triple crisis of biodiversity, climate, and environmental pollutions. The proposal is pushed through in an anti-democratic way, without consultation of stakeholders, without an impact assessment, and without a proper democratic debate in the European Parliament. This is beyond belief and extremely worrying. The EU institutions here send a very negative signal to European citizens ahead of the European elections. One of the files that was not suppressed, fortunately, is the soil monitoring law we will discuss today. We very much welcome the proposal from the Commission for a first ever soil law in Europe. The proposal, however, lacks ambition and needed targets, timelines, or mandatory measures to secure effective progress towards healthy soils. We strongly regret that the recent vote of the European Parliament even weakened this proposal more. We hope that the Council will continuously and ambitiously move forward and support a soil law which is fit for purpose to bring EU soils back to health by 2050. Today, we look forward to digging into some essential aspects of soil health, connecting scientists, policymakers, farmers, and the civil society. Unfortunately, I will have to leave soon, and I wanted also to thank Caroline Heinzel from EEB and Christine Schampelaere from Pan Europe for all the background work for organizing this meeting, and I wish you all a fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining here as well as online. I will now give a brief overview of the Solo project and Horizon Europe project we are involved with PAN. So the project is called Soils for Europe, and it's a project which supports the EU soil mission. It's a Horizon Europe project that will run until the end of the year 2027. The EU soil strategy sets out a framework and concrete measures to protect and restore soils and ensure sustainable use of soils. So the aim is to achieve healthy soils by 2050, to also guarantee no net land take, and to achieve soil pollution levels that are reduced to concentrations that are no longer considered harmful to human health or ecosystems, but also to protect soils and to manage them sustainably while also restoring degraded soils. So the strategy sets out concrete actions by 2030 to achieve then healthy soils by 2050. And it's also a key deliverable of the EU biodiversity strategy as well as the Green Deal. Then the soil mission is actually a set of concrete actions to foster the aims of the soil strategy. And the goal is to really lead this transition towards healthy soils. And the focus is really on research and innovation. And concretely, the soil mission aims at establishing a network of 100 living labs and lighthouses to really create this co-knowledge process between practice, so between farmers, between science, between policy, and really test in real-life conditions possible solutions to restore soils and to sustainable manage soils. So this would lead to a harmonized framework also for soil monitoring in Europe, the soil mission. And a key aim is also to really raise the awareness of the broader audience on soils. as even if attention is really increasing, the broader audience is still often not really aware about the complexity, for example, and all the functions of EU soils. So the SOLO project is a project that covers 11 EU member states. So there's 17 partner organizations in these 11 member states joining. And yeah, I won't explain all the details of the project, but I will highlight some key aspects. But the main objective is to identify knowledge gaps and drivers, as well as bottlenecks for research and innovation approaches that can really help establish the goals of the SOIL mission. And then the other important aim is to create a knowledge hub of different stakeholders that really can last beyond this project, so that we really have something permanent that allows for discussion among these different stakeholders. The project has then 10 think tanks, and we are with PEN involved in a think tank on soil pollution and restoration. Together with the head leader of this soil pollution think tank is the Institute of Advanced Studies in Kossuth. It's in Hungary, IASK. And we have in this think tank gathered stakeholders from various backgrounds to think together about these knowledge gaps and about drivers and needed activities to foster research and innovation. This is then a first schedule our think tank worked on to really set a framework, an assessment framework to cover all aspects of soil pollution and restoration. And we have, for example, gathered in a scoping document important existing knowledge gaps. So this is some results from the process to show you what we're doing at the moment to really assess the different data gaps and but also the needed activities and the bottlenecks to achieve these activities to foster research and innovation. Currently, we are in the review process of the scoping document. So different reviewers were invited to give their feedback. And we received many valuable feedbacks from different backgrounds. But then if you're interested, there will be a second round of reviews, and we would very much welcome anyone interested to let us know and to let us know you want to be a reviewer, or if you want to become involved in a think tank or follow the project more closely, you're very welcome to do so. And you'll find the contact information here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. Before moving on to Ms. Ripa, I'm going to give you quickly a very brief overview of the soil monitoring law, just to make sure that we are all on the same page when talking about this. Last year, the European Commission presented a legislative proposal for a soil monitoring law, which included an objective to address healthy soils by 2050, a definition of healthy soils, and an obligation for member states to set up a soil health monitoring and assessment framework. It also required member states to define and implement sustainable soil management practices and to identify and manage contaminated sites. This proposal has been debated in both European Parliament and Council in the last months, and last week the European Parliament voted on its final position on the file. So that's for the context, and now I'm giving over to MEP Manuela Ripa, a member of the European Parliament for the Greens group, as shadow rapporteur on the soil monitoring law for the Greens in the Environment Committee. She intensively worked on the file, and we are very glad, Ms. Ripa, that you can join us today to provide some insights on the outcome of the plenary vote last week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to speak today of a very, very important topic, the Soil Monitoring Directive and the outcome of the vote in the European Parliament. Indeed, we voted last Wednesday on it. And I have to say, your event today is a very timely, because as you mentioned, we have now the position of the European Parliament and we are waiting for the Council position on this file. Well, let me first of all say that it was not at all clear that we would have a Parliament position on this one, because it was uncertain until the very end, especially if you see that all legislation at the moment that regards protection, nature and biodiversity are either voted down in the European Parliament, I just mentioned the pesticide regulation, are very much delayed. We have now with the nature restoration law in the Council. The reasons for this are certainly manifold, but certainly the angry protests of farmers and the upcoming European elections, the regional elections in many member states do their big part on this. First of all, why need an EU policy on soils? As it was already mentioned by Martin, soils all over the world, but especially also in Europe, are indeed facing various threats. Erosion, contamination with toxic substances, salinization, soil seeping, and loss of carbon. It's really endless. And this microphone does not work all the time, but I hope that you can hear me. So 60 to 70% of our soils are in poor conditions. And if we are really serious about the European Green Deal, then there's no way around our soils. Healthy soils are the requirement for achieving the EU sustainability goals and are the very ground of our existence. Martin mentioned it, but I also would like to highlight it again and to say it again, that healthy soils are paramount for the functioning of our ecosystem, our food, a stable climate, and they are an important CO2 reservoir. And until now, there's not a binding EU-wide regulation to protect our soils. At European level, we have regulation for our air, to protect air and to protect water, but not on soils. And here I have to raise the question, isn't soil as important as water and air? So Europeans deserve a strong soil protection legislation as soon as possible. And we have learned from previous experiences, and as the European Environmental Agency rightly pointed out already many years ago, we can only achieve this by having a new wide common framework on soils. This is the best and most efficient approach to regulate the use of our valuable resources in all member states in a sustainable manner. Speaking of the European Environmental Agency, according to...
I sent my answer now.
Hello. This is a boring hello.
Maybe you have to mute yourself online. Speaking of the European Environmental Agency, according to the recent published climate risk assessment reports, drought and floods will become the rule in the next years in Europe. Healthy soils can help to mitigate this phenomena as they retain water, limit dryness, and store carbon. The report also highlighted that climate risks to soils are to increase under all climate scenarios. The risk of soil drought is expected to increase in Western, Central, and Southern Europe, whereas soil erosion is to increase in Western, Central, and Northern Europe. Therefore, it is definitely not enough to leave soil protection to the member states. We immediately need a common European effort to ensure our soils are in healthy conditions. And already as a shadow rapporteur on the soil resolution back in 2021, I was constantly calling on the Commission, together with other shadow rapporteurs, to prioritize the importance of soil and to come up with a legislative proposal. Already at that time, it was not at all easy and a hard fight against other groups in the European Parliament, especially the biggest group in the Parliament, the EPP. But in the end, we succeeded, and we had in plenary a majority to ask the Commission for legislation for the protection of soils. And on one hand, I have to say I'm happy now that the Commission finally presented this legislation in July 2027. And this was, I have to say so, already a huge win that we get a legislative proposal, because the Commission was very reluctant to do so, because back in 2006, they already presented a proposal, the Parliament adopted a position, but then it was blocked 7 years in the Council, especially by member states as Germany and France. So the Commission didn't really want to come up again with a proposal because they feared that this would happen again. So good news, the Commission presented a proposal. But on the other hand, I was really disappointed that the Commission only presented a soil monitoring law and not a soil protection law, which you would need for healthy soils by 2050. So, which were the key demands for this law? As shadow rapporteur of my group, I positioned as follows. Clearer targets on soil health by 2050, coupled with intermediate targets we have to have an intermediate target in order to reach the goal by 2050. Otherwise, it will not work. Then mandatory soil health plans at soil district level, clear binding obligation regarding soil management. As for land take and soil sealing, we suggested that member states should continuously reduce land take with view to achieving the objective of zero net land take by 2050 at the latest, and comprehensive rules on brownfields as part of a mitigation strategy. Moreover, we asked for comprehensive rules for cleaning up contaminated sites, including polluters pays principle and references to animal health. What was now the outcome in Parliament? The outcome of the vote in the committee, in the Environmental Committee on 11th of March was already rather weak, but it had some binding obligations for member states to improve soil health. The obligations were based on 5 ecological classes, from critical degraded soils to soils with a high ecological status. That was all inspired by the Water Framework Directive that is familiar to member states. The soils are considered healthy if they fall in the 2 best categories, that is high soil ecological status or good ecological status. For other soils which fall in moderated degraded soils or critically degraded soils, and not very ambitious, but a binding timeline to move to a better category was proposed. This should have guaranteed that around 2050, all soils in the EU would have been in a good or high ecological status. So we were very hopeful to keep this in plenary. But unfortunately, due to a heavy lobbying also from the agro industry, key proposals adopted in the committee did not carry a majority. So in the end, we do not have intermediate targets, binding soil district plans, obligations for member states to improve the ecological status of soils within a strict time frame, sustainable soil management principles and their binding implementations. We only have a non-binding voluntary list of sustainable soil management principles, and the initial proposal on the Commission was much stricter here. Another article that I'm quite dissatisfied with is the one on land take and soil sealing. This is a topic that is very dear to my heart. As I see, especially in Germany and in my home region that I know best, that we have too much soil sealing. Nature protection is completely ignored. It would have been important to introduce a binding target at EU level to achieve zero net land take by 2050. The use of abandoned brownfield and former industrial sites should have been prioritized over unsealed and agricultural land. It is equally important that real compensation measures are put in place when soil sealing occurs. It would have been necessary to prohibit land take in water protection areas. This was an amendment that I represented also with the group, with the left group in plenary, because it is so important, so that in water protection areas there is no land take, and to minimize building permits in Natura 2000 sites. But let's see also the positive side of the plenary vote, not only the negative ones. We reaffirmed the objective of healthy soils by 2050. The non-deterioration clause that we had suggested survived. And we have a general obligation to improve and rehabilitate soils. And as I already mentioned, there are also animal health references in several articles. We have better and more comprehensive definitions. We have a strong text on contaminated soils that it's much stronger than the Commission proposal, as member states have to draw up a public list of such sites in all countries at the latest 4 years after entry into force of this directive. And member states will also have to investigate, assess and clean up contaminated sites to address unacceptable risks to human health, animal health and the environment due to soil contamination. And costs must be paid by polluters in line with the polluters pay principle. In the article on land take, the establishment of a register of abandoned and brownfield sites in all member states, which I advocated very much for, is recommended. It is also very positive that we set extensive provisions for cross-border cooperation when it comes to the setting of the so-called soil districts and the establishment of soil monitoring systems. So all in all, to conclude, of course, without enforceable targets, obligations, and even indicative sustainable soil management principles, we risk to undermine the aim of this directive. So what will be the outcome in the very end depends very much on the position of the Council and on the trialogues that will start after the European elections and the new term of the European Parliament. And I'm for sure, there is still a long way to go to reach healthy soils by 2050. I thank you now very much for the attention, and I'm looking forward to hearing the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ripa, for this elaborate overview of the many weaknesses of the current text, but also of giving some hope about the few positive aspects in there. Are there any pressing questions now for Ms. Ripa? Otherwise, you will also have later during the panel the opportunity to ask some questions. Okay. Then I will now introduce Vera Silva. She's from Wageningen University and has a PhD in soil pollution with focus on pesticides. She's also a member of our think tank in the Solo project on soil pollution and restoration. And she's also involved in the European Sprint project, which focuses on pesticides in soils. Thank you very much, Vera.
Good morning, everyone in the room and online, and thank you for the opportunity to be here thinking alongside you. And also, I'm very happy that we have already started an introduction on the importance of healthy soils, but also on the context, regulatory context around this monitoring law. Thank you very much. So I'm adding to the discussion with data from the scientific point of view, and I'm showing you something on a specific area, so on pesticides and also on agricultural soils. Of course, when you look into the law, it goes beyond that, but well, let's start with this. And indeed about the monitoring. So, well, on the positive side, there are indeed efforts and increasing available data on soil pollution monitoring, and these from efforts of the scientific community, the main ones, of course, scientific community, EU Soil Observatory, and the Lucas Soil Module. On the pesticide domain, more specifically, well, most of the data actually came from the scientific community and from targeted studies. And when I'm saying targeted studies, it means that there are a specific objective pushing the study, that rather often they focus on a specific geographic region and on a specific and rather often small group of contaminants, which altogether have some limitations. So we cannot simply put the pieces of the puzzle together and have a reliable assessment on actually how much soils we have contaminated. There are a lot of variants to be accounted in this compilation, including differences in the field, in the sampling, but also differences in the lab on the analytical part. It does not mean that these targeted studies are not needed. They are. Don't get me wrong. They look into specific points in terms of assessment or risk assessment or fate that are crucial to understand better the problematic around pesticides. Right here in the right corner, for instance, I put a graph of a targeted study that looks into how long we can still detect pesticide residues in organic fields. And you can see in the last chart, in the last bars, there are residues after 20 years after transition. So these targeted studies are needed, but gives a fragmented picture on the EU agricultural soil status. I highlight here in this table the three more comprehensive European scale studies. These three studies from the last 5 years. And it's Silva et al. 2019, Vieira et al. 2023, and Knut et al. 2024, just published. And these rely on samples from the Lucas survey, but also on this sprint project that Christine introduced and that I will talk a bit more later in my presentation. And well, I'm not going into details of the studies, but I want to highlight that over time, the number of residues that we are testing is increasing. So that is a really good trend. So we are going more and more comprehensive in the assessment. But as you can also see in the middle rows of the table, that almost all the soils that these studies have been tested contain pesticide residues. So it goes from 83% to 97%, as you can see in the table. And actually, most of the soils contain mixtures of pesticide residues. And actually, these mixtures are rather complex and goes from currently used pesticides, where we can still act on in terms of regulation, but there are still legacy effects of compounds that had been banned decades ago. So all our actions may have an impact right now or in the future. There are, of course, still some uncertainty, and by still, well, maybe I'm being too optimistic. There are real uncertainty about the real effects of these mixtures towards soil organisms, soil health, and ecosystems in general. I want to highlight also that, well, although we are making progress and getting more and more comprehensive, we are still not testing all the pesticides that are currently approved in the EU market. So these figures, in terms of contamination, pesticide levels, and mixture complexity, are likely to be even higher than presented here. In this last study of Knut et al. And from the Sprint project, we had the opportunity to collect application records with the farmers. And we used these application records to predict levels of pesticides, just like it is done during the approval procedure of pesticides. And we compared these predictions against our measurements. And we found out that actually, rather often, these predictions are not very accurate. It's not that it's a clear pattern that predictions are under or overestimating. It's way more complex than that. It's not uniform also in terms of the compounds that are being not accurately predicted. It's rather complex, and there are a lot of nuances that needs to be further explored. So generalizations, even at the regulatory process with prediction, should be explored further. And in the last point that I have in my left part of the slide, that, well, we are generating data on the distribution of pesticide residues, in this case in the soil, but it's very hard to infer further on the meaning of these levels, on these measurements, because we do not have standards for quality in soils. And this applies for individual pesticides, but also for the mixtures itself. I'm not going into the details on the risk of pesticides and the importance of soils. Well, some of it had been already raised today, but I want to highlight that besides the obvious effects of pesticides on soil biodiversity and the consequent implications in terms of cycling and even soil productivity, there are also hidden impacts that should be accounted. And these indirect impacts comes, of course, from, for instance, alterations in the habitat due to pesticide use, but also to other ecosystems. We do know now that soils are not only a sink, but also a source of pesticide residues. And we know that, for instance, through surface runoff or leaching, the pesticides in soil can move into water systems and compromise water quality. We do know also that by ingestion of contaminated food or contaminated water, but also even ingestion of contaminated soil particles, human health may also be affected until a certain extent. So the links goes beyond soil, and it's imperative that we start addressing these as a systemic, holistic problem. So the Sprint project addresses some of these challenges. So it's an Horizon 2020 project funded by the European Union, and we have 28 partners across Europe, also one in Argentina. And the main goal of the Sprint project is actually twofold. On first part on the assessment of risks and impacts of pesticides, and this using a global health approach. So not only on the ecosystem, but looking also into plant, animals, and human health perspective. And the second part where we are currently in the project is to use the gathered information to identify transition pathways towards more sustainable use of pesticides and lately of food production. Sprint project is unique in a lot of aspects. I'm putting here in this slide some highlights. And in my presentation, I'm focusing on its unique coverage and data sets, which I'm presenting field data today. So here in this figure, you have an overview of the type of samples that we collected. So in 2021, right before COVID, right during COVID, we did a comprehensive sampling campaign. And we did it in, as I mentioned, across Europe. So we had 10 case study sites in Europe, one more in Argentina. And in each one of these case study sites, we had conventional and organic farms where we sampled and we collected a lot of supporting information. In the left side of the slide, you can see an overview of the type of samples that we collected and that we analyzed. So for instance, for humans, we collected urine, stool, blood, and we analyzed pesticide residues in all of this. We asked also the participants, and by participants, I'm not talking only about farmers, but also about the neighbors, and also about consumers. And we asked our participants also to wear a wristband, silicone to collect the pesticides that they are exposed. We collected, for instance, nasal swabs, not for pesticides directly, but for microbiome analysis, because, well, although the core of the project is pesticides, we have a holistic health approach, and we look into microbiome here also as an indicator of resilience. So we had a lot of data, and in the ecosystem, for instance, we have water, soil, indoor dust. We collected also, we also look into pesticides in the fish tissues that we can potentially be eating. We look also into diversity. So there are a lot of data that we generated and that we are publishing at the moment. Even the study protocol with these strengths and limitations are out for discussion. So here is just a glimpse of the type of results that we are providing as a project. So one of the highlights on the left corner, we have on the number of pesticide residues across main environmental matrices. So we have box plots for soil, crop, air, indoor dust, water, and the sediments from these water bodies. And without entering into much details, I want to show the patterns that we have pesticide residues pretty much everywhere. I'm sorry, that might not be the most scientific way to say it, but it is right away what I see. And what we see more scientifically now is that we have more residues in samples originated from conventional fields than organic. So that is good news, but that samples from organic fields are not pesticide-free. That is also an important insight that we have here. And we can also see that there are, of course, some matrices that accumulate more pesticides than others. We know, for instance, about soil. It's been proven that soils can accumulate pesticide residues, but we were somehow also surprised to see the high numbers of pesticides in indoor dust samples. And by indoor dust samples, we literally went to the house of the participants and asked them to use the vacuum cleaner, and we analyzed pesticide residues in that dust. And we come up with some samples with more than 100 pesticide residues. So this is in terms of numbers. Levels followed a kind of similar pattern, so higher in conventional than organic, and higher in indoor dust than in the other environmental matrices. But it's also important to look into the type of pesticides that we found and the type of pesticides that we tested and did not find. That is also relevant to understand. And that is a bit what I'm showing in the graph in the right, the bottom right, that it's obvious and clear that there is different profiles from the samples collected in conventional fields where currently used pesticides are more dominant. That is already expected, but it's also important to realize that in samples from organic fields, although legacy compounds are dominant, there are still residues of currently ones. And this highlights the potential off-site contamination problem that needs to be explored. We also look, because we have this holistic approach in the whole project, we also look into, okay, I have this information, about different matrices. Are compounds that occur in multiple matrices or are compounds that are more targeted and maybe more problematic for some matrices alone? And that is the graph that I put in the right, top right corner. So you see, for instance, right away, the first example that acetamiprid, it's present in all 6 matrices. So The bubbles indicate the color and size indicates frequency and concentration. That's not that relevant for the moment. I want to stress that there are compounds, again, that are widespread in our environment. And I could extend this figure to the other type of samples that we analyze with livestock and human. This is adding to it. Next, well, we had this first overview in terms of numbers, type, and levels of pesticides. We look also into, okay, what is the meaning of these pesticide residues? And we look into the hazard profile of these substances. So you see that we have the results here by 3 columns. So the pesticides that are approved in the market and that should be of low risk to non-target organisms, the candidates for substitution, and in the right, the ones that are no longer approved, but we still detected some of them. And well, we have like kind of 2 blocks, horizontal blocks, the first for conventional fields and the one in the bottom for organic fields. And well, just when you look into it, you don't see an obvious difference into the patterns. The numbers change a bit, sure, between classification approval status and between conventional and organic, but the pattern is rather common, that moderate compounds, moderate hazard compounds are the prevalent, and that also there are some data gaps on this hazard profile. And these data gaps may mean that indeed, well, we don't have information about it, or it might mean that there are assumptions being made at the risk assessment stage that due to, for instance, mode of action, a certain organism is not expected to be impacted by a certain pesticide. So with this type of information, we were trying again to, okay, making most use of it and to see, okay, how can this be useful beyond scientific community and how can this be used by different type of factors? And we come up with a pesticide prioritization indicator that combines monitoring data and hazard information. So this aligns with the rationale of the already existing indicator from the European Commission, the harmonized risk indicator, used to evaluate progress towards risk and pesticide use and risk reduction. But it's more specific. So the European Commission accounts for pesticide sales. Well, we account for actually field data on frequency and concentrations. The European Commission accounts for a hazard factor based on approval status, and we see that within the same category, the compounds profiles are highly variable. So we do look into the specific characteristics of the pesticides that we want to use, and based on this adapted indicator, we were able to provide some curves that are presented in the right, and these curves can be tailored based on your wish. So we can make one, for instance, for soil, and we see highlight compounds of higher values that are of higher interest. So for instance, if I want to provide some guidance or some discussion in terms of, okay, I'm starting a monitoring program, which compounds shall I look into? Well, this type of exercise can give some insights. And for soil, we see, for instance, that glyphosate, well, it's the top one, a consequence of its high use and high detection. But we still also see, like, for instance, DDTs and DDEs that are also relevant based on the lower frequencies, but higher hazard and risk to non-target organisms. So this type of curves can be used for that, for support monitoring plants decisions. But when we extend it, indeed, like to the whole ecosystem and account also the results and the curves from water, air, we can make even a curve at ecosystem level. And this can support decision-making concerning pesticide use and concerning pesticide approval status. So indeed, there is kind of a list for further attention and requiring further assessments. Well, I know it's a lot of information. I want indeed to provide you a glimpse of the type of data that we are generating and the potential applications. There are for sure many more data within the project and applications with the data that we are using, some that we are exploring, some hopefully that some of you are. But yeah, it's important to make sure that science has some data that should be accounted in the discussion and then can support more informed and hopefully better decision making. And I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vera, for this very interesting data and overview. And I'm sure during the panel later we can discuss further. Unfortunately, we have to let you know that Tuur Vandeweyer, the Flemish farmer who would join us, is really stuck in traffic and around here somewhere. So he's not sure if he can make it, but he's still trying to. So hopefully he will still arrive. But then we would suggest we can already start a panel. And then maybe he can share his presentation later after the panel. We welcome then to the panel Vera Silva from Wageningen University again, also Ms. Ripa, MEP and Shadow Rapporteur for the soil monitoring law, and Sébastien Mouret from EurEau, policy advisor at EurEau. You can take a seat here. Thank you very much for joining. We would first like to give the word to Sébastien Mouret from EurEau, because the others have already presented before. So we would like, if possible, to provide us with in a approximately 5-minute statement what your perspective is on the issue of unhealthy soils in Europe, and how you think or had hoped that the European soil law can bring a change in this field.
Yes, so just to quickly introduce EurEau, we are the European Federation of Water and Wastewater Services. And so from the point of view of water, the angle that we have on the soil monitoring law is that soil provides essentially 2 very important ecosystem services when it comes to the greater water cycle. One of them is retaining the water in place as it falls. The other one is purifying the water as it seeps towards the aquifer. Now, these are absolutely essential to a sustainable water cycle. It is useful in flood prevention. It is useful in pollution prevention, not just of the groundwater, but also of the surface water. We saw on Vera's slides earlier a very useful flow chart of how this all plays together, but you can have, of course, pollution runoff from the soils into water in case of heavy precipitation. Now, unhealthy soils don't do that, or they don't do it properly. And indeed, polluted soils, as we saw with Vera's slides, actively can harm groundwater and surface water instead of protecting it, acting as a purifying filter on the way down to the aquifer. So flood protection and quality of groundwater are major externalities of soil management. They are a good externality when the soil is managed sustainably. They are a harmful externality when it is managed poorly. So monitoring is, of course, a step forward, and we very much welcomed the proposal by the Commission to have a soil monitoring law at all, because it is essential also for the water services, especially those delivering drinking water that is made from groundwater, to have information on what is in the soil and in the groundwater in the first place, so that they know what they need to do in order to provide wholesome drinking water. But action must follow the monitoring as well. In order to apply the control at source principle, which is enshrined in the treaty, to the soil monitoring law, we need to basically stop as much pollution as is feasible before it reaches the soil in the first place. Because as we saw, again, from Vera's extremely insightful presentation, once the pollution is in the soil, it is extremely difficult and long to remove. And the same goes for groundwater. You know, depolluting a river, it's not easy, but it's simple. Once you stop the source of pollution, which is the hard bit, then the river will wash itself clean in a relatively short amount of time. An aquifer is a lot more like a lake. Sure, there's inflows and outflows, but the majority of the water stays put for a very long amount of time. And so once pollution reaches a groundwater body, it is there to stay whether we want it to or not. So that is why our position on the soil monitoring law was very much that the Commission proposal was the bare minimum that was necessary, but we needed also obligations for member states to act on the results of the monitoring that they would get. And we firmly believe that it's not too early to set those imperatives for action, even if they actually come into force after the first round of monitoring. There's no reason to wait until that's done to set what they ought to be. So that is our point of view.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very clear. So we don't only have to monitor, but we also definitely need to act, and we need to really try to prevent soil pollution at its source, as that's by far the easiest, the best, and also most economical solution to prevent soil pollution. I would also like to ask maybe to Ms. Rieper to in 1.5 minutes, if you would like to summarize maybe your perspectives also on the trilogue negotiations that will be coming up after the Council has adopted its position. Yeah, how do you look forward to that, and what are your expectations?
Thank you very much for this question, and it's a very difficult question because I would need a sphere here to predict the future, because I think very much depends on the European election, the outcome of the European election, and how the next European Parliament will look like. Because we saw the difficulties that we had with the position of the European Parliament on this, and the groups that were really trying to block the whole law, even if we know that we need a law as soils are in such bad conditions. But we even had groups in the parliament who did amendments or did one amendment in plenary to block the whole law. And there you can see that it is not easy to get what should be common sense, something to protect our laws. And what is the situation now in the Council? Well, on some aspects, the Council is more progressive than the Parliament regarding, for example, the sustainable soil management. I have to say yet, because the Council is going to meet again on June on this. I only know the outcome of March. And there they still have regarding sustainable soil management in what the Commission proposed, so that we have a minimum of sustainable soil management practices, and that the impact shouldn't be too negative on soils regarding the soil management. And this is much more progressive than what we had in Parliament, because in Parliament all this was completely deleted. But on the other hand, the Council is not so keen on land take, on trying to minimize land take. And I know that some member states, especially smaller member states, have problems regarding the 2050 target on net zero land take. So we can't expect too much there from the Council. It's a very mixed picture. I think we have some good positions of the European Parliament on contaminated sites. We have until now a good position of the Council of Sustainable Soil Management, and we have to see after the elections who will negotiate, who will go on negotiating this law from the side of the Parliament, what the composition of the Parliament is, what the new Commission will be, who will be the Commission President, what line they're taking, if they're going to protect the European Green Deal, or if they're just doing an industrial Green Deal out of it. So it depends on many aspects, but I really hope that common sense will prevail, and that after the elections, they let be the election campaigning, and they start to focus on what we really need in Europe, and that are healthy soils.
Okay, yes, indeed. We can hope that after the election, the common sense comes back, and based on all the data and the overwhelming amount of information that we need healthy soils, maybe the best parts of the Parliament's position, the Council position, can come together to make it still as strong as possible, even if, of course, too weak still overall. Vera, could I also ask you from a scientist perspective, the soil law, what is your hope for it, and what do you think it should do regarding, for example, soil pollution, and how could it solve or help solve the issue of soil pollution in Europe?
Thank you, Christine. Well, it's a hard question indeed. And I add to my colleagues that indeed, well, it's important to monitor, to know first what we have. And we still have fragmented information. We are talking about 70% of the soils being unhealthy, but that's an estimate as well. So it's important to have a current evaluation of the health status and act upon it. I fully stand by it. I think from my own perspective, I cannot talk on behalf of all scientists, but how I see it, well, and from the pesticide background that I have, I think there are some dilemmas that needs to be addressed. On one hand, we are talking about the policy and the top-down approach, but once you go to the fields and we go talk with the farmers, there are challenges that they also face bottom-up. And there are a lot of pressure on farmers to fix a lot of issues, and well, they cannot do it alone. We have to do it all together, and we have to enable the system towards more sustainable practices. We need to have policies, of course, in place. We need to have targets, and we have to find ways to do it. We have to have equipment, innovation. We have to share knowledge and provide this exchange between the different actors to promote indeed more sustainable land management. And of course, to keep it comprehensive, because it's not easy to fix soil pollution, but it should be a reason to stop trying and to stop working on it. So yeah, we need to act, because in the end, well, the importance of soils, it was the initial statement of this event. And indeed, like, it's where we get the food that we eat, and the healthier soils have a lot of advantage for healthier food, for healthier people in the end. So we need to keep that in mind, raising also awareness on the importance of soils and policies to protect soils.
Thank you. And maybe it's a small follow-up question. So also the exchange between science and policy is very important. And overall, there has been a lot of exchange between science and policy for the soil monitoring law. But we do hear from quite some scientists that often it's not so easy for them to get involved or contribute to policy processes, because the information is maybe not getting to them, or it's difficult to follow these processes. Is this also your experience, and should indeed there be more long-term established relationships, connecting science and policy on these larger files?
Well, in my perspective, there is always room for improvement. I think indeed, like, science is providing data, but this data has a context and should has been used also to be applied. And well, I do think there are some efforts on both hands. So from the policy to account for data and have more informed decision making, and also from the scientists to reach policymakers in this case. And even with the monitoring law, there was even like an initiative also from Wageningen University. I don't know about all the others, but at least where Wageningen University scientists put also a paper, let's say, on the suggestions, so the limitations that they saw in the monitoring law and how this could be tackled. So it's good not to only criticize, but also try to work together towards solutions and provide approaches how to tackle the challenges that we have, which are many.
Yes, thank you very much. Sébastien, I would like to ask you also on your perspective in framework of climate change. We've seen it throughout Europe. Many citizens and also certainly farmers are faced with severe droughts, also with floods. Could you enlighten us maybe a bit about your perspective in that regard, regarding soil health and the connection with water resources?
Calls for as long as possible. And that has an effect on the load of the amount of water that's falling across a larger area, basically. And so you are not having it end up just concentrated where it can do the most damage. And of course, that means as little land take as possible. That means tackling soil sealing, which was one of the additions in the Parliament position that we very much welcomed. That has an effect on managing these extreme weather events and, of course, not preventing them. It's not actual climate mitigation, but in terms of adapting to that climate change that we know is coming, it means making those effects a little bit more manageable. And on the side of drought, where you have intermittent rainfall, and especially as we see in Europe, it's not so much a diminution of the overall amount of rain that falls in any one place over a year, but it's much more uneven rainfall patterns across the year, where you will have too much rainfall in one season and not at all in another season. If you have healthy soils that can retain the water in place, it also helps replenish the aquifers at the same time. When you can let the water seep down into the aquifers and effectively reconstitute the reserves for when there's no rainfall, and you can tap into this natural reservoir underground of clean water. So it's really two birds with one stone, as it were.
Yes, we also recently had an event with a farmer from the Soil Heroes Foundation, Melanie Klomp, and she was managing her farm with partly conventional, the way they used to manage it, and then partly using restorative practices to increase soil biodiversity, soil carbon. And the pictures she showed from the difference after heavy rainfall were really incredible. Like on the conventionally managed fields, there was just a layer of water, while the other, after a day, the water had just infiltrated. So it makes it then really concrete what the benefits can be. Ms. Ripa, I would maybe also like to ask you about the Common Agricultural Policy, because of course the soil monitoring law will hopefully provide a much needed framework for the restoration of soil. But then regarding agricultural soils, we have the Common Agricultural Policy, which for which the funds amount to 1/3 of the EU budget. And of course, the CAP should play also a role in healthy soils. But according to the reports of the European Court of Auditors and the Commission itself, many assessments have shown that until now the CAP hasn't been performing on soil health, or that results have been very variable. And just I would like to ask your views on the CAP's role regarding soil health.
Unfortunately, the CAP that we have at the moment is still the CAP that was established 50 years ago, meaning that the money spent is spent not the right way, and we all know it, because most of the money, you said it's 1/3 of the budget, so it's a big chunk of money, goes directly it's just spent for the size of the fields, you know. So the bigger a farm is, the more money it gets, and this destroys small agricultural farms. And so we know that we have to change. And in the end, to be very honest, we wouldn't need a soil health law or a soil monitoring law. We wouldn't need a pesticides regulation. We wouldn't need a nature restoration law if the CAP would function the way it should function. And that is, first of all, to support farmers. I'm absolutely here, and I'm glad that you raised that point. We need to support farmers, and we need to give them the means to do environmental services and to have more animal welfare. Because at the moment, the money for these kind of services is much less than the money that goes just for the size of the land they get the money from. So if we would have a good functioning agricultural policy, we wouldn't need all these other laws, because we would have sustainable soil management in the CAP, and we would have the money to help farmers to do this transition, because we are in a climate crisis, we are in a biodiversity crisis. We need to do a big transition of society, of industry, but of course also of the agricultural sector. But if you just touch this in the European Parliament, I have the feeling that there's a red flag, waving. Oh no, they're going to touch the CAP and we can't change because we have to do agriculture the same way we did 50 years ago. So this will not help us. If we don't have a well-functioning CAP, we can forget all these other laws that we're trying to do at the moment, and that unfortunately, like the pesticide regulation, is voted down in Parliament. So I really hope that after the European elections, common sense will prevail. I have to repeat it in the Parliament, and that we finally, because we are going to decide the CAP for the next 7 years, we are going to have more environmental services, more animal welfare, more sustainable soil management, and in hand with the farmers, and certainly not against farmers. I'm fully in line with them that we have to cut red tape, that we have to help them, to support them. But I also think that politicians should have their role here. They shouldn't just make them having more fears, but they should tell them, we are here together and we will help you to do this transition together with you, and not over your heads, as they say in Germany. So there's a lot to do.
Okay, thank you very much. But yes, indeed, that's many experts confirm or stress that the CAP budget should be much stronger linked to environmental goals and to support for farmers to provide public goods, ecosystem services. But maybe that can bring us to, we notice in many conversations with farmers from across Europe that good practices are available and are being used by many farmers already. But there seems to be often, of course, more research and innovation is much needed. But there also seems to be a big lack of implementing good practices. And Vera, maybe I would like to ask you, because in framework of the Sprint project, you and colleagues have also worked with farmers. What do you think are important drivers to increase this uptake of practices?
Yes, that's a very important point. Indeed, in the Sprint project, we have these workshops and interviews with different actors and farmers as well about the lock-ins and barriers towards adoption of more sustainable practices. And well, of course, each case is a case, but we see some factors that comes across rather often, and economy and the cost benefit of some options are always one of the first reasons to avoid further more sustainable practices. But I do want to highlight that there are indeed like success stories, that there are indeed good examples, and there are already some technologies also available. And I think we need indeed to exchange further and support further also financially via subsidies or something, to adoption of these measures, because in the end, like we know that, and on the pesticides point of view again, we know that chemical control should be the last resource to control pests, but rather often, the other options are not on the table for a lot of farmers due to different type of knowledge restrictions, or they don't have access to these measures, and it's important that we facilitate that we all work together.
Yeah, indeed. Advisory systems can probably play a big role there. And also in many projects, it seems indeed to be the fact also that a group of people can work together in networks, that's often an important factor for success of implementing these practices more widely.
Well, yes, I fully agree. Thank you, Christine. Indeed, I forgot, but of course, this advisory from projects and also from farmer associations, for instance, is crucial, and sharing the knowledge even among projects and farmers, it's very relevant when we put them talking to each other. And me, at least as a scientist, I always learn a lot. So I think it's indeed important that we also account their knowledge on the solution that we have to find together. And well, especially in my field of research on the pesticides and productivity. I think it goes even beyond like the pressure on production. So we want more sustainable production, but I think it's also important to realize that even we as consumers, we have a role to play, and that our choices, even in a supermarket, may influence the whole system a bit. And it's important to reconnect everyone into the challenges that we are facing, and not thinking only about producing more sustainable, and not thinking only about the targets for pesticides that were not adopted, which is very sad. I'm not even going there, but I think it's important that we think also like, we need to rethink also like the possible changes in diet. So we need to rethink food waste that could fix a lot of these issues, like as Ms. Ripa was saying, if we have a good CAP, we didn't have some of these issues to be discussing now. And if we didn't have such food waste, maybe we didn't have such pressure on pesticides and food production as well. So there are like consequences of at a higher stage, not for implementation. So it goes beyond the obvious, I would say. And we need indeed to keep making the links and the bridges between actors and between fields of research and policy.
Yes, I think that's a very important point indeed, that we have to make the changes across the whole chain. But also there, unfortunately, we were hoping to have already the proposal on the framework for sustainable food systems published, but also waiting on that. But the aim of that initiative would indeed be to create this coherence across the whole chain. Sébastien, I would like to ask you, I think you already said it before or covered it, but just concretely in its current form, do you believe that the proposal will be able to protect water resources in Europe? And if you could summarize again, what would be key elements? I mean, if not, what would be key elements that are missing?
Thank you. Well, I suppose, first of all, it depends what you mean by its current form, because there are two current forms at the moment, and an uncertain, fuzzy third one that will emerge at some point. From the Commission proposal, already we had 2 steps forward in the right direction. One was the monitoring itself. As I said, that's terribly useful information to have. And also the chapter on contaminated sites was the only real obligation to act that was in the Commission proposal in the first place. And then in the European Parliament position, we saw also a few improvements from that and a few steps back, as Ms. Ripa observed. But in terms of the improvements, we got the principle of amelioration of the soil conditions, of non-deterioration as well. And also for contaminated sites, a much stronger chapter on there, with also something that's, of course, very dear to us, a prioritization of drinking water abstraction areas when it comes to the investigation of potentially contaminated sites, making sure that they are the ones that member states look into first. But a lot is still missing, and the keystone of what is missing is this clear and concrete obligation for member states to act on the results of their monitoring, and to make sure that we don't just construct a very elaborate and sophisticated tool of observation to chart exactly how much we're declining over time and do nothing about it. That would not be a good result at all. So again, something even as simple as the amendment with clear targets and deadlines that was endorsed by the ENVI committee would already have been a step in the right direction. That was rejected in the plenary, but concrete goals for improvement are really what's needed there.
Okay, yes, indeed, because monitoring, you also said it, Vera, it can help, of course, to always keep re-evaluating your actions. But at this moment, there's more than enough information to urge us to act, and there will always be certain uncertainties that you can then analyze further along the way. But yeah, we definitely have to act now. Maybe we would like to open the floor now to questions here in the room.
Manuel Eimers. I'm from the representation of the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern to the EU. First of all, I would like to express that we're very much supporting the objectives of the proposal, and we're also especially supporting it with regards to the contaminated sites. My question is mainly to Ms. Ripa. One of our main concerns is that there is, at least to my knowledge, no financing mechanism in order to support us as the ones implementing the new rules. Therefore, my question, was there any financing mechanism discussed during the negotiations in the European Parliament, and what is your opinion about it?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, we were discussing financing, and we were also discussing incentives for member states when they do something to protect healthy soils. And we have a financing chapter in it saying that after 2027, there should be extra money to help to have healthy soils, which is very important because, as I said, the healthy soils are as important for our survival than air and water. So we should do everything that we can in order to help member states and to help also national authorities to restore health, to restore soils, and also to give them the financial means to do so. But also already in the CAP, there is a lot of money that can be used for this, and we should finally invest in this one. And another very important aspect that I also fostered very much is that regarding national authorities, there is not only the financial issue, but also a supporting issue in showing them how best soils can be protected, because often there's a knowledge gap also in national authorities about this, and they should help to restore nature and to help to protect our soils. So this was also very important. And another aspect regarding the 2050 goals, I fully agree here. That was something that I always discussed in the shadow meetings. I said it's so great that we want to achieve 2050, the target of 2050, but if we don't give us intermediate targets, then member states are not obliged to act once they see that soil is in a very bad condition. And this will certainly not lead us that by 2050 we have the healthy soil. So if we're really serious about this goal, then we would need intermediate targets. But as I said, with the constellation at the moment in the European Parliament, this was absolutely not possible.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ripa. Are there other questions in the room or maybe online? Yes.
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Hazel from Europa Bio. I just had a question about if the panel could maybe comment on the role that biocontrol or bioremediation could play in restoring soil properties and safeguarding the ecological balance of soil in Europe. Maybe even the possibilities of strengthening such practices either through regulation or through scientific evaluation of these innovations.
Hi, thank you for the question. I'm not sure. Well, I will address a bit from the scientific point of view. Well, I think, of course, organic farming, well, there are a lot of benefits that associated to it. And there are data that corroborates indeed the benefits. And, well, they help on the good aspects and they attenuate the bad aspects. So, of course, that is like the adoption of organic farming will help on its own. And like using indeed these techniques also to alleviate contamination and improve the quality of the soils, well, that is for sure something that if we cannot avoid, well, and we already have contaminated and we already have degraded soils that we have to act upon. Indeed, we need to understand which will be the best method, because again, there are no one solution fitting all, but we need to see indeed based on the characteristics of the sites, and we have to prioritize the sites and where to start. But I think indeed there are like good opportunities to use for remediation of this contamination. And well, just for instance, in the Netherlands, we are also like now starting to work on remediation of soil contaminated with asbestos, and we are also looking into like phytoremediation and also using microorganisms indeed to alleviate the contaminant load. So indeed, we need to explore the specific conditions and the efficacy and the cost benefit, let's say, of each measure. But I think that is for sure a key aspect. I do not know about the incentives in policy towards adoption and implementation of this. Maybe Ms. Rieper knows a bit more on that regard, but for us, from the scientific point of view, I see a lot of indeed possibilities and advantages about these measures.
Can you say again which measures you meant? Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the soil law that we have at the moment is a directive. And I think it's a good way that we have a directive, because it means that we just give the frame and the member states can see what the best solutions for their for them is, and especially, of course, and that is already written in the Commission proposal, and the Council, as I already said, still endorse it, that everything that affects negatively the soil health should be avoided by the soil manager. But how to achieve this should be led to them. And of course, we should listen to science, and we should listen to the agriculturists that often knows best. And it's a pity that the farmer couldn't be here today, so he certainly couldn't elaborate more on this. But the only thing that I can say is that if we don't act, and if we still remain as vague as we are at the moment, yes, we have all the monitoring, which is good, no question about it. But if we don't have any obligations, then I'm sure that the Commission, I don't know when, but we'll have to come up with a regulation. And regulation means you have to do it as it is written in the law, because then we have no other alternatives anymore, because soils are then in an even more bad state as they are at the moment. Thank you.
Yes, maybe I can also add something on what Tuur Vandeweyer, the farmer who would join normally, would speak about. But they are indeed also, or he's also advising on practices to, for example, increase functional biodiversity, to foster natural control of pests. So by increasing natural enemies, and they have very good results with that. And we have heard from many farmers and initiatives that it really works well in making your system less resilient. And regarding biocontrol, if I'm correct, also in the proposal for a sustainable use of pesticides, there was also the intention to increase access to biocontrol to make this easier. But then the SUR was withdrawn. But yes, in general, there's biocontrol can play a big role inside the framework of integrated pest management, which is then really based on prevention first, and then taking all measures to make your system as resilient as possible against pests, against climate events, and then only use other certain substances as last resort. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Lucas Traub from NABU German, or BirdLife Germany, and thanks a lot for the interesting insights and presentations. I had one question, because has been a lot of talk on regenerative agriculture in the past, and like no-till agriculture, and also within our environmental, like our organization, there has been a debate on it, and I would be interested in your perspective in terms of, like, I mean, like, for example, in the no-till agriculture, there is still a glyphosate in use, but still there are a lot of benefits in terms of soil biodiversity, maybe, and humus buildup and so on, and less erosion. And it's a huge debate, I guess, and there's maybe not one of those is the best, but it would be interesting to hear your perspective on this. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe I can start, and thank you for the question. I think you raise a very good point. And you are touching upon the multiple threats that soils are facing. Indeed, I'm talking here about pesticides and soil degradation by chemical inputs, but you're talking, for instance, about soil erosion that is also a major threat. So I'm going back to the political correct answer that we need to look at on a case-by-case situation. Like I would not advise, for instance, in a vineyard with very steep slopes and that are very prone to water erosion to avoid to use some of these measures. So we have to see indeed what makes it's again, it's a cost benefit. There are multiple factors to take in the equation. It's not only like, yeah, I can stop use of glyphosate, which would in principle in general be a good thing, but worsening this soil erosion. So indeed we need to explore, and we need to provide information and the measures, and we can of course then upscale this scenario to other farmers. So it's not that we have to do it all over again. No, so let's use, like, if we have these conditions and this context, these are the in principle the best options to follow. And there are even like soil apps that can give some guidance on like the best practice for this type of conditions. So I think it's indeed important that we look into a context and the possibilities and implications of adoption of a measure that, again, which in principle could be a good thing or in principle could be a bad thing. There are more to it, and that should be explored. And once we have an assessment there, share it with others that may be in a similar situation, so we don't waste more time and resources going all over again for other locations. Sorry, I know I did not answer your question because I cannot answer your question. I'm just realizing, and I do agree with you that there are more to it, and we are talking about sustainable land use, that indeed there are multiple threats.
Maybe I can also add something small. I mean, from what we heard also from farmers or experts working on this, that also a big role also plays minimal tillage. So it shouldn't be necessarily no tillage or deep tillage, but also with minimal tillage already a lot can be done. And there's also, of course, the aspect if you change something one day, from one day to another, of course, I mean, your soil biodiversity, your soil health will not be restored. So you need to establish that resilience also of soils. Permanent soil cover can play an important role here. It's also about making that transition. But of course, I mean, we find then that the sustainable use of pesticide directive that has already been established since a long time should have also already fostered this transition much further than where we are today, because different analyses show integrated pest management hasn't been really implemented. We also find that a lot lies also in technology. For example, in Flanders, there has been exhibitions on different tools for mechanical weeding with much lighter tools that, based on sensors and GPS, can play a big role in mechanical weeding. So also that is promising. Then you combine a lesser impact regarding chemicals with also not the heavy impact deep tillage, for example.
Also add something. I mean, there are a lot of sustainable soil management practices, and of course, from organic farming, we can learn a lot here. Also, how's it called? Agroforest. Forestry, where, for example, if you have more trees on your field that can give shade to the other plants, so they're more resistant, they don't need so many pesticides. So there are manifold ways. And as I mentioned before, I mean, often farmers also know best how to treat their plants and what is good for their soils and what not. But then I visited a farm which was very interesting, because the farmer was very proud that he didn't touch the soil, so he didn't work too much on the soil. So he said, you see, I preserve my soil and I don't do anything, but in the end, to get rid of all Unkraut, how do you say, weeds, he then used pesticide, he then used glyphosate. And I was like a little bit shocked because I said, okay, I don't know if this is so good for the soil health, you know. I think we shouldn't negatively affect soil health, and we can learn a lot from organic farming here without using pesticides, and it should really be the last option. And this was also something that the pesticide regulation wanted to foster, but in the end didn't come through because you would have changed the way you're doing your agriculture and this was not well seen, let's put it like this.
May I still add something? Well, I think we touched upon it, like, yeah, we are talking here now about glyphosate, but I think it's indeed the pesticide should be the last resource to the control. But I think it's also important to reflect on the type of pesticides that we have in the market. At the moment, we have like 440 active substances approved in the market. There are metabolites associated with these substances. So we have a huge diversity. We have candidates for substitution, which we know that pose some harm towards non-target species. So I think it's not only about using it as a last resource, but also being more strategic and on the ones that we approve in the market, be more rigorous, be more ambitious. So having, once we have to go to pesticides, having better pesticides to use. So, and by better pesticides, I mean ones that, well, don't persist as long in soils on the environment, those that are not as toxic for non-target species as some of the others. So maybe that means a strong reduction in the pool of pesticides available, and that maybe implies shifts in traditions on products and maybe at least at short term some impacts on yield. But I think in the long term, having also better pool of pesticides, smaller and better pool of pesticides, that could also contribute to the solution.
Thank you very much, Vera. Yes.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Emma from EurEau. On that topic, I wanted to ask what role a risk assessor like EFSA would play in reducing the pool or in changing the risk assessment of pesticides.
Yes, well, we need to have a comprehensive risk assessment before a pesticide is allowed in the market, which is a good thing, to be clear. On the other hand, these assessments are done not on an individual compound only, and we know that mixtures of pesticides are the rule rather than the exception. And I'm talking about pesticides, but there are other contaminants to be accounted as well. So there are interactions about contaminants which can affect its toxicity. And of course, we need to be and improve the risk assessment procedures to be more realistic to the field conditions. So in terms of the compounds, the mixtures, so the compounds do not exist isolated. The compounds add already to a pool of legacy compounds, for instance, so there is already background contamination that can affect it. And also in terms of how this risk assessment is done, like which species we are testing, because rather often EFSA accounts for a small pool of standard species, but what if we look into native species? What if we look into other species? Will the outcome be the same? Is EFSA approach conservative enough? And the endpoints. So are we looking just impact on mortality, growth, reproduction, or shall we look also into more subtle early sign endpoints to assess a potential impact? So EFSA is doing progress in the assessment of mixtures. They are. So that is positive, and I'm happy to see it. But there is still more to go, and we are working. We in Sprint are working also closely with Park, for instance, and there are other projects that indeed focus on mixtures and the risk assessment procedures. And I'm happy to see funding still towards this investigation because it's a crucial point. They have a first saying, and I think they are doing good, but could always be better.
Thank you very much, Vera.
Maybe just a comment from the chat that also went into a similar domain because it mentioned also other contaminants. Someone in the chat asked, is there any interest to also include pharmaceuticals and REACH chemicals, microplastics, nanoplastics into these observations to show also the exposure and presence of these that are in some cases by far outcompeting pesticides. And this person also mentioned that there should be a shift to focus on all man-made stressors found, not only pesticides, and that these need to be put in context with them, with synergies and prohibitions and contraceptions between all these man-made stressors. So that was a comment from the chat.
Yes, Beck, sorry. It was a lot. Well, I fully agree. I don't know who put the comment, but I fully agree on it. Yeah, indeed, at agricultural land, of course, like pharmaceuticals from manure input plays a role, plastics from plastic mulch plays a role, and we know there are interactions among contaminants, and for instance, microplastics can be carriers of pesticides. So indeed, there are synergies that affect fate and toxicity of substances. And I do fully agree when we say that we should be more comprehensive of multiple contaminants as well. But I'm also not naive saying that assessing everything, it's easy or cheap. So it's important that indeed we set priorities and we set indeed in terms of compounds and locations, and we set also plans to act on it. Because again, I am all in to us gather information, but it's hard to follow up on it as a scientist, as a farmer, for instance, to do what are the next steps. But yeah, for sure, there are multiple contaminants. And even if we talk about other types of soils, not agricultural soils, there are other types of substances like PFAS, for instance, that are still relevant issue to be addressed. So yeah, definitely comprehensive and holistic.
We have quite strict pollution limits in EU water legislation, which it is the job of all of society to comply with. It's not just the water sector that has to ensure that the water bodies are healthy. And that's why we were very much advocating for the monitoring and assessment of soil health to take into account all the priority substances that are listed in the Groundwater Directive and the Environmental Quality Standards Directive, which is being revised as we speak. And I was glad to see the Parliament's text go some way towards that, to at least take them into account for member states to list the pollutants to be monitored. So just wanted to mention this.
Because indeed, so this was also very important for us that we have explicit references on tackling pesticide residues in our soils, in veterinary products, in PFAS, and in microplastics. So this was taken into account, but it's not binding.
Thank you very much to all panelists. To close, we would like to ask you if you could, in one sentence, we know that's very hard, conclude and with an idea that you would like to leave the audience, the room with to go home, to take as a go home message.
Thank you. Well, it's something that you've heard before this morning, I think, but monitoring is great, but it's not enough. It's as basic as that. We need concrete commitments to improvement as well. Thank you.
Healthy soils are as important for our survival on this planet as clean air and clean and enough drinking water.
I would like to add that, yeah, indeed, all of this adds together about the need of transition, that it's important to be aware and engage in being part of the solution.
Okay, thank you very much for these very clear and very important statements. I will now give the word to Caroline Heinzel from EIB for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting panel discussion. I really enjoyed it because I really was under the impression it was a conversation and we were able to take some questions from the room as well. So this was really nice. I'm of course really sad that Tuur was not able to make it. He was stuck in traffic and I think really wanted to come, but it was apparently impossible. So I'm sure if we want to, for example, include his slides in the final slide deck, or if any of you have questions for him, I'm sure we can put you in contact. So throughout the morning, we have delved into this important role of healthy soil for agriculture, the effects of pesticides, the connection between soil and water pollution, the latest developments in the European Parliament on the soil monitoring law. And I always enjoyed very much for these kind of events when different kind of actors come together, and also always to see that there is a great interest for soils. During these hours, we have also spoken about the recent vote on the soil monitoring law in the European Parliament last week. At the EB, we very much acknowledge the important and constructive work that had been done in the Environment Committee, and that all the negotiations coming up with compromises that were supported by all political groups, finding a middle ground that kept a certain amount of ambition, while also responding to the concerns that had been raised. However, we were really disappointed to see that a majority of MEPs in the plenary, mostly from conservative right parties, then decided to significantly water down the law. Because having, of course, a soil law as such is a success. And also, as Ms. Rieper has highlighted in her first statement, we have to think of where we're coming from, and having such a law is definitely a success. But we find it worrisome that this European Parliament position now does not include clear legal mechanisms that will actually make it possible to achieve healthy soils by 2050. Because I think we should not forget what we really want to achieve with this law. Because the objective is not only to have a piece of paper written with the title soil law, the objective is to improve the condition of our soils. And I ask myself, can the soil monitoring law in its current form really achieve that? Can we really bring our soils back to an intact and thriving ecosystem with this law, and that in 26 years, because 2050 is indeed only 26 years away. So now, while the law is progressing in the legislative process, it will now be key to make it as ambitious as possible. And there is still time for that because, of course, now our eyes are on the Council, on the EU countries who are going to be paramount in bringing this law back on track, to make sure that the EU as a whole embarks on this journey of healthy soils together. Because, and I think we all agree on this, healthy soils are not optional. They make our society grow and thrive, and they are our lifeline. So let's make sure they are healthy and fertile also for future generations. And I pass on to Christine for some final words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I will just close the session now, and I already want to tell you that afterwards you're very welcome to join us for a drink and some refreshments. We heard many valuable contributions today, joining different voices on soil health, and I agree with Caroline. It's really a pity that Tuur couldn't join, but we will discuss with him. Maybe we can record his presentation later and provide you with it. Soils lie beneath us, but deserve to be at the top of our priorities. Soil pollution concerns a mixture of many different pollutants and is one of the important soil degradation factors. It poses an extensive problem with risks for soil biodiversity, ecosystem functioning, and human health as well. Soil pollution undermines our surface and groundwater quality and undermines the ability of our soils to be an ally in climate change. The dialogue between policymakers, farmers, science, and civil society is key. And it's also an important opportunity to strengthen, establish long-term frameworks for dialogue. Effective policy frameworks linked to ambitious goals, wide sharing and implementation of existing, already long-known effective practices to restore and protect soil health, as well as research and innovation fostered by, for example, EU soil mission activities, such as the ongoing SOLO project, can allow laying the basis for healthy soils. To conclude, I would like to highlight that the severe adversity many key environmental files have been facing, despite clear scientific recommendations, is extremely worrying. The disappointing vote in the Parliament showed a disregard of many policymakers for the urgency to restore soils and for science and the public interest. The diversity and importance of soil life and functions in combination with the fact that it is estimated that up to 70% of soils are in bad condition, should concern everyone. We cannot sustainably produce food or build a future on a matrix that is degraded and sterilized of all life. We need urgent and ambitious action to restore and protect soils. We can just not afford not to, with the cost in EU linked to soil degradation estimated at 97 billion euros per year. Postponing needed action now will merely postpone needed actions, as not restoring soils is not an option. And we feel that the Council now has an essential opportunity to lay the ground for effective soil protection and restoration. We would like to very warmly thank all of our speakers who came here today from Brussels or the Netherlands to share their very valuable thoughts. Warmly welcome again to also reach out to, for example, be included in the solo project, or if you would have any questions that come up later. Thank you for joining.